I'd like to continue my series of videos on Bobby Fischer, the great American chess champion who won the world title in 1972. Previously, I've looked at some games of his from the Herceg-Novi Blitz tournament in 1970, and I want to take you back a little bit before that to the match that took place in Belgrade between the Soviet Union and the rest of the world. This was a massive event, and Fischer took part obviously for the rest of the world team, and he played on board 2. Incredible that he agreed to play on board 2. Larsen insisted on playing on board 1 for the rest of the world team. Fischer faced Petrosian, not an easy one of course, and this was the first game they played, and this is really one of my favourite Fischer games. Well, I have so many favourites, but this one, well, anyway, let's take a look. Petrosian played the Caro-Kann, and instead of some of the main lines with knight c3, Fischer played this exchange variation, which has been a favourite of mine over the years, following Fischer's example, I have to say. So bishop d3, it's rather like a Queen's Gambit exchange variation with colours reversed, but where white gets to play his bishops to more active squares. So we can see in this position the other bishop comes out to f4 on this splendid diagonal. Normally one of the opening principles is you play your knights out before your bishops, but here claiming these diagonals before black gets to play the bishop to f5 or the queen gets to c7 is very important. Now you might remember in the recent US Championship, Sam Shankland played exactly this variation with white. And in this position, his opponent, Wanda Liang, played this extraordinary move, e5. I wonder what Fischer would have made of that. You can check out that game if you haven't seen it. You just look in the video description. But at this time, the normal moves here were to play either queen c8 or queen d7, or this move, knight a5. In fact, Petrosian is following a very old game of Capablanca's. So the queen's tacked, check, bishop drops, and now queen b6. Now the whole idea is that black is going to play bishop b5, exchange off this bishop here for this dangerous bishop on d3, and this famous game between Morozzi and Capablanca played in 1926 went like this, and well, this is not a bad position for white, I have to say, but Capablanca played an extraordinary positional game and won that. But to prevent this move bishop b5, Fischer simply played a4, and this at that time was a novelty, and really this has put paid to this variation with knight a5. It seems such a simple idea actually, just preventing black from playing the bishop to b5, and then this bishop is rather shut out of the game. It's not looking good behind the pawn chain here. If the knight comes into b3, I suppose this is the only downside of the move, is that the knight has this square, but actually well, it's not clear what you can do with this knight actually, and white will, you know, get on with knight e5 and could always exchange off with knight d2 at some point. You've got to watch out for this little pin here, of course, but basically shouldn't be any difficulty for white at all. You can always exchange it off with knight d2. So Petrosian played rook c8, knight d2. Now watch out, as this pin I mentioned, so that's why the queen dropped back to b1. And now here, well, Fischer mentions g6 as a move for black. That's certainly a solid move, trying to block out this bishop. But, well, white could also build up an attack on the king side. Instead, Petrosian played knight h5, and this was played, well, because Petrosian had miscalculated something actually. So bishop e3. Now black has to take care of the threat to h7, And again, probably g6 is the best move. If f5, then this is rather uncomfortable. White is doing extremely well there. h6 played by Petrosian, and now knight e5. Fischer seizes the initiative straight away. It's actually this move that Petrosian had underestimated. Both players gave brief notes in the bulletin, and Petrosian gave this variation. This is what he'd overlooked. He thought originally that he could play this, but he had overlooked that this knight gets trapped with g4. In fact, this isn't absolutely clear. Petrosian thought that white was simply better here. Well, white probably is better. At the moment, black is a piece down, and Petrosian thought that white could simply unravel like this, but black does have a lot of pawns for the piece. Fischer said in the bulletin that he would have played knight f3 and played like this. That's a more pragmatic way of playing the position, keeping a kind of positional advantage actually, and well, not just positional, hoping to go on the attack as well down the f file, and still threatening g4. In any case, after knight e5, knight f6, h3, and bishop d6, so both sides developing. Now, obviously, black is unable to exchange off the knight on e5 because of this problem here. The normal move here would be castle's kingside, but after knight f3, supporting the beautiful knight on e5, white is teeing up already for moves like queen c1 and bishop h6, already extremely dangerous. And therefore Petrosian played king f8, and it's a pretty ugly move, but well, I think an indication that Petrosian felt that the attack, if he'd castled, would be just too dangerous. But now, of course, white is absolutely in the driving seat with these split rooks, and makes a lot of sense to advance the f-pawn to try and open up the f-file. Always got to watch out for this pin here. In fact, the tactics don't work in black's favour because, well, obviously not pawn takes bishop because of queen takes, but first of all, we just push the queen away and then you can take the bishop. So after f4, Petrosian played bishop e8. Bishop f2, excellent move. So that means there are no possible tactics with the loose bishop, but also this bishop is going to bounce around here. And this looks already horrible. Petrosian had to go backwards. And now, well, there are many ways to play this position. You could perhaps bring the queen over. Perhaps support the knight before going forward, but that's not Fischer's way. He's such a straightforward player. You know, he has an objective, and that's to break open the f-file, and he just goes for it straight away. The best that Petrosian has is this, and then to block the f-file. But you can see with this rook trapped in the corner, this looks pretty desperate. And all Fischer needs to do now is shift his pieces towards the king side. But it's around about here that Petrosian finds an absolutely remarkable defensive idea. Fischer now plays knight g6. Again, a very principled move from Fischer, grabbing the bishop, and he basically thinks that white must be winning this position. You could first play the queen here and then bring the rook into play, but no, it's straightforward. It's just taking the initiative. And I'm not surprised that Fischer had just got to this position and thought, well, this must be winning very easily, because the rooks are still split. This rook cannot come to the e-file, So all Fischer needs to do is bring rook number 2 into the game and black won't be able to survive. But Petrosian had obviously foreseen this position and played the remarkable king e7, bringing the king into the middle of the board, but it's his best chance. The king is going to try to run to safety, and at least he's trying to bring this rook into the game. So let's see what happened. Queen f5. Incidentally, Fischer, in his notes in the bulletin, gave the move king e7 double exclamation mark. He was obviously impressed by Petrosian's idea. So he brings his rook over. It still looks fantastic for white. Still very hard to imagine how black is going to survive this. And now Petrosian made a mistake with rook f8. Both players thought that rook c6 was the best move, with the idea of bringing the king out, and then perhaps this rook can come into the game, and also the rook defends, well, important squares along the 6th rank. In fact, well, with modern technology, you can find a win here for white, and my machine likes b4 here. And well, there are some beautiful variations. So, you know, normally I don't like to just quote a computer, but let me show you this line. It's really very, very nice. So queen takes pawn, and we push on again, and we'll see the point to these in a second. Queen e6. Now this is just creeping further in, and actually there is a tactical point as well, that if this queen moves away from the knight, so for example queen c5, you might think to bring the queen back, then rook takes f6, wins immediately, pawn takes rook, queen takes pawn, checking king and hitting rook. So black is just very short of moves here. Let's try, well, just for the sake of argument, let's see what white is threatening. h5. Sometimes the rook may be able to come here, but let's see how white wins. This is really nice. Check, king here, and now we would like to play rook c1, but black has a defense. The queen comes to a5 and covers the rook. So first of all we play b6. This is really delicate, and then rook c1, so that queen a5 is no longer available. So the queen has to take the rook, and now first we give a check, and when the king goes to b8, then we take the queen, because the king is now pinned. Well, some absolutely beautiful tactics. And it just shows that black is indeed lost in this position, but not easy to find some of those moves, of course. But after rook f8, well, Fischer had it under control completely. I mean, he finishes very, very nicely. Queen e5 just takes control of more squares. And here's a nice variation. If queen c7, offering the exchange of queens, then we can take, and this simply wins material. For example, here, and the queen really doesn't have a good square. We can do this, but rook e6 is, well, just wins on the spot. Black has to take, and obviously that's a one endgame. So after queen e5, Petrosian played rook c7, and now Fischer played b4. Well, there are obviously similarities between this variation and this line, the game continuation, and the one that we've just seen. So let's see. And now, beautiful move by Fischer. It seems as though Petrosian might be crawling out. He has maybe a little bit more coordination, but c4 finishes things off beautifully. If queen takes, then queen d6 checks and attacks the rook, so we can't do that. So therefore, pawn takes pawn, but now the d file is open, and that spells the end. So let's just see what happens. Check. Rook goes in the way. There really wasn't anything better by this stage. And rook takes. And in this position, Petrosian resigned. If king f7, then queen e8 is a very elegant checkmate. So that was the first game that Fischer and Petrosian played in this Soviet Union rest of the world match. They played 4 games in total. Fischer won the first 2 games, and then the last 2 were drawn. So a convincing 3-1 victory for Fischer against Petrosian, and this was really the start of things. Of course, the Soviets knew very well how strong Fischer was, but this was just confirmation that he could beat one of the best players in the world, Petrosian, one of the best defenders in the world as well. Meanwhile, Spassky was playing on board 1 for the Soviet Union against Larsen, and I'd like to show you one of his games as well, but that's coming up in the next few days, so watch out for that one. Of course, you can see all the Fischer games in the Fischer playlist, so do check that out. You'll see that the playlist in the video description and in the info tab as well. Thanks for watching.